So today I wanted to talk about DWM a little bit. So I've been a DWM user for maybe 6 months now. If I switch over to my terminal, you can see I'm actually not using DWM a little bit right now. It's a little bit embarrassing on KDE Plasma, but why that is a discussion for another time. But I've really enjoyed my experience in DWM. Uh, Learning to patch features in was a little bit of a learning curve, but it was definitely doable. And once you get into your own workflow for editing DWM, it really becomes an enjoyable experience. However, I think the ecosystem of DWM is a little bit lacking. And I don't mean from a using it perspective. I don't mean from, it's not a fully fledged desktop environment, the ecosystem's weak. I mean from a making your own patches perspective, from a developer perspective. I could be a lot more open to new developers, which is maybe not something the community wants, but something I want. And what do I mean by that? So, every DWM user is pretty comfortable with patching and compiling from source. Maybe not everybody, but if you're using DWM, you're probably compiling from source, unless you really don't want any additional features. And that would lead you to believe that making your own patches is very easy. People are already going to the source code to configure DWM. They're applying patches for resolving some merge conflicts, which means they must be going into the C file. But that doesn't actually mean it's easy to create your own patch, or that it's necessarily easy for someone new to developing, to making changes to DWM would be able to do so easily. So let's go to DWM. And so this is just the base repo. There's no patches to this. I have not configured it at all. So you can see there's only like 10, 15 files here. There's not that much to the source code, which is kind of the entire point of the suckless philosophy. So let's go into dwm.c. Let's go all the way to the bottom into the main function. And you can kind of see that if you want to understand how DWM works, let's follow down the main function. Okay, there's all this stuff here about setting locales and versions and stuff. Okay, let's not care about that right now. Run seems interesting. Run seems like where, most of the kind of functionality would come in. So let's go to run. You can see it has this X event. So let's say we're not familiar at all with the X11 system or how you interface with it in C, which I am, for the most part, not familiar with. But I have done a little bit of research ahead of time, at least for this one function. So we can see that, there's an event. So we assume, this manager probably handles events, and you can kind of assume it's probably things like button presses, maybe windows opening, closing. I'm not really too sure. Xsync. Okay, it's syncing something. DPY, what's DPY? So let's go to the top of the file, look for DPY. Now, where is DPY? So DPY, that's a display. Okay, so it's a display. Not really sure what displays consist of yet, but let's go back to run. We gotta go back. Okay. Yeah, so that's Xsync. It takes a display, false. I'm not really sure what it's doing, but it must be syncing some sort of things with the display. And given context, probably has something to do with events or some sort of system calls. I'm not sure. Let's look at this while loop. Okay, so the while loop. So this is probably where DWM is going to do most of its functionality. It says main event loop in the comment. So while running, so I assume running is just a Boolean, and when it wants to turn off, it turns running to false. It makes sense. And there's next event. it gets the next event from the X11 system, and it passes in a pointer to that X event variable. And so now I'm assuming, and I'm assuming this because I have actually read the man page for this function, that it takes, so it's not really an assumption, this is what it does. It looks at the X11 event queue, it takes the first item, and puts it into this event variable. And then does some sort of event handling. I'm not really sure how that works yet. But as you can see, looking through the DWM source code is not that hard. However, while it's not that hard to read the individual functions, and there's comments here telling you generally what happens, like main event loop, that's pretty descriptive. Call handler, that's really helps you out. But there's no high level architecture overview. It kind of tells you at the top, it says, the dynamic window manager is designed like any other X client, blah, blah, blah. Event handlers are organized in an array, blah, blah, blah. Child of root window is called a client. But that's not really telling you how, as a high overview, things work. And you can go through, it's not that many lines of code. It's, a little over 2,000. And you can probably figure it out for yourself. And that's what I assume that all the developers and maintainers for DWM do. But I think as a community, we could really lower the friction to getting started making your own patches. There's a lot of people out there who really like customizing their own system, and maybe they know a little bit of C programming, and I'm sure they'd love to make some patches, but they look at the source code and they're like, well, I could go through this, but that sounds like a lot of effort for a feature that's probably already in another window manager. And I've been going through that personally recently. I'm like, why am I on DWM? There's some features that I want, or it's not interacting with other software like I want it to, and I could just go to this, and I could spend time patching it, I could spend time programming it myself, but it seems awfully hard, or not hard, it seems awfully time consuming, and I could just go to another window manager. But I think for now, I'd actually like to stick with DWM and maybe rough it out a little bit. I've been thinking of going through the DWM source code and annotating it to make it a little easier to understand what's happening from a high level, so that when you want a feature, you can have a greater understanding of where in the source code you should be putting it and what function should you be putting it in. So I've already been starting to do that. I started with the run function because it's very short. Going through, maybe, like for example, even if you're a C programmer, going in, you may have never interacted with the X11 system, like why would you? So you're not really familiar with these functions. So I'm going to do a little bit of work for everybody and go through, annotate what each function is doing, why, my guesses on why it's doing it that way, and kind of making some notes about functions that people might not know about, like xsync, xnext event. And this isn't supposed to be like a replacement for people going and reading the man page themselves, but it should reduce the friction. They can get a high-level overview understanding of how it works and how kind of the data flow might look like if they want to implement a patch. And then they can go into, the X11 libraries, read the man pages for themselves to really figure out how to implement it specifically. But I think this will be very good. I don't know if other people will actually find use for it, but personally, I think this is a very good exercise for me, something to do as, a little hobby project. And if you have any suggestions on how to go about this, or your thoughts on kind of this idea of going through and annotating DWM, let me know. And hopefully I will be putting out a video soon on my progress on this endeavor. I probably won't do it all at once. Maybe I'll go through some core functions, or maybe if I figure out a high-level architecture, maybe I can Maybe draw a little diagram out and show people. But yeah, hopefully you have that to look forward to. So yeah, let me know what you think. And until then.